Hello? Tak, oczywiście. Hello and welcome everybody. Hello and welcome everybody. So, I guess we can start now. So, this is, as you can see, a presentation being a part of European City of Science, Katowice 2024. More specifically, being a part of Numbers Week. And the title, as you may see, is The Cock-Proof Assistant in Research and in Teaching, in Personal Perspective. I am personally still affiliated with VU Erlangen-Nuremberg as private docent. It's a temporary appointment. And as you can read on at the bottom of this slide, some of the material has been borrowed from other people, more specifically from Benjamin Pierce and Steve Stansevich. With their knowledge and with their permission, and even encouragement. So, because we have this personal perspective, the first thing to explain is who am I? And well, very broadly speaking, my original interests lie in intuitionistic and hormonal logics and their various semantics. But from the very beginning, since my PhD studies, I've been making a living in PhD departments. And the way to justify it is by the famous Dijkstra quote, and that many of you might have heard, is that which is that computer science is no more about computers than astronomy is about telescope, biology about microscope, or chemistry about beakers and test tubes. I would say that the German name of informatic or Polish name informatica is a more fortunate name. It is also the title originally used on my PhD diploma, in fact, from Japanese Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. And indeed, this abstract or theoretical sounding interest turned out to provide some vistas, perspective, and segues into quite a few different subfields, such as databases, model checking, knowledge representation, reasoning, program verification, functional programming, and, as it turned out, proof assistant. But before I tell you more how I personally got into proof assistance and what I got out of them, which is even more important, it might be worthwhile to formulate and answer quite a few broader questions. Obviously, why should you care? So if you're a mathematician, as I was informed, a significant percent of the audience should be PhD students in mathematics here. You may ask, whether proof assistant is something about discovering new theorems, or rather finding ways of filling gaps in incomplete proofs. And then the question is whether you'd be able to read those computer proofs, or maybe this is just about checking step-by-step proof that you obtained so far. And then you may ask, why? Why would you care? So I'm a pro, right? When I prove something, I did. As a mathematician, I even see this proof in my head. I triple check whatever I submit to various journals. Even if I fail somewhere, of course, referees would help me, right? Would call me out. Well, they may be critical, but they are honest and fair. And then the proof will be read and discussed by my colleagues and peers. And then if you're a computer scientist, because I have to speak from my own perspective as well, and hopefully there are also some computer scientists in the audience too, you may ask, oh, what does this whole business of proofs have to do with what I am doing? After all, I am an engineer, and what I know about is already testing in various other standard ways of ensuring software reliability. Isn't that enough? Why I need this fancy mathematical stuff? And some of you may also be aware that formal methods have the reputation of being infamously difficult to scale. And then, whether you're a mathematician or a computer scientist, you may ask how on earth those proof assistants are supposed to improve teaching. Teaching is hard enough as it is, after all, even if you don't throw still more stuff into it, in particular some fancy technical tools. So there is quite a lot to answer. I will have to go through certain slides quite quick, I'm afraid. You can hopefully replay this presentation on YouTube in much slower pace if something goes too quick. But we will begin with the computer science rather than the mathematical side of things, as we need to learn why logic and type theory enter the picture at all. And in fact, we're going to see that there is quite a tight correspondence between concepts from logic and programming. Some of you may know what I'm referring to. And this correspondence goes so far that in the second half of the 20th century, several crucial results were discovered both by, at first by logicians, and then a few years later, again by theoretical computer scientists. And only then we will take care of mathematicians' questions. And then, if we still have time, we can return to my experiences and connection with education. So the first question for a computer scientist is how we build software. Software that works, and importantly, we have to be able to be convinced that it does. Of course, this question is particularly important when you talk about security critical software. This may be this may have to do with operating systems or network stack or cryptography or medical devices, flight control systems, power plants, home security, or fashionable blockchain. And from the point of view of not just individual programs, the question is also whether the programming language that I'm using is safe. So whether compilers that I'm using are sound and do not introduce bugs on their own, static type systems, data abstraction modularity features, security controls, sometimes even security features of processors themselves. And if the only thing that you do is testing, which is of course unavoidable, then you open yourself to criticism from Edgar Dijkstra, who said that program testing can be indeed a very effective way to show the presence of bugs, but is hopelessly inadequate for showing their absence. And as a logician, of course, you understand why, because it is easy to prove existential statement and much harder to prove an universal statement. And yet another quote by Dijkstra, let's say frenemy, or a great friend and competitor at the same time, another of the founding fathers of formal methods in theoretical computer science, Tony Hoare, also a winner of computer science Nobel Prize, the Turing Award. He pointed out that there are two ways of constructing a software design. On the one hand, you can make it so simple that there are obviously no deficiencies. And on the other hand, and this is what happens really most of the time, is to make it so complicated that there are no obvious deficiencies. And he insisted that the first method is far more difficult. And in fact, the skill, devotion, insight, inspiration that you need for this is of the same order of magnitude as discovery of simple physical laws, which underlie physics, underlying nature. So it is essentially a mathematical activity. Actually, both of them, both Dijkstra and Tony Hoare, are mine for excellent quotes on the subject. So I'm leaving two more quotes from Tony Hoare. One of them saying that, of course, almost anything can be implemented, solved, and even used if you have enough determination and especially enough money. Nothing that a mere scientist can say will stand against the flood of $100 million. But one thing that you cannot purchase in this way is reliability. And this is, as he says, the price that the very rich find most hard to pay, this pursuit of simplicity. And another very important observation from him is that the value of tests is not that they detect bugs in the code, but that they detect inadequacies in the methods, concentration, and skills of those who designed and produced this code. Okay, so this, as I'm clearly suggesting, is when logic is entering the picture. Logic is the field of study whose subject matter is proofs, and we have whole volumes written about its central role in computer science. In fact, some authors like Mann and Waldinger call it the calculus of computer science. It is in fact a pretty common metaphor. There is a famous all-star paper by Harper, Imen Markolaitis, Vardi, Vianu, those of you who are in computer science of things recognize probably some of those names, on the unusual effectiveness of logic in computer science, which is a deliberate reference, parody of pastiche, or even more famous paper written by Nobel Prize winner many years before on the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in natural sciences. So this metaphor that logic is the same for computer science as mathematics or calculus is for physics is pretty common and well established. So we have to start with logical foundations. And then we need a language, and we are going back down now for a while, don't worry, it's only temporary, deep back into depths of 19th century. In particular, we see here a splendid picture of German mathematician, logician, and philosopher Frege, who published in 1879 a book about concept script, a formal language for pure thought model on that of arithmetic. And a lot of contemporary notation that we use in logic even these days actually stems from that by now almost forgotten book. Well, certainly not forgotten in philosophy departments, but definitely not in mathematics and computer science departments. So he actually published a whole series of books after that about foundations of arithmetics, basic laws of arithmetics, and his goals were to isolate logical principles of inference, derive laws of arithmetics and principles, and set mathematics, not just computer science, as you see, whole mathematics on the solid foundation of logic. Of course, computer science didn't exist back then. And indeed, the effort of, not only of him, of course, but the effort that Frege was a part of at that time was recognized by David Hilbert, often thought to be one of the last people, maybe together with Poincaré, who understood the entirety of his contemporary mathematics as one of the central problems of mathematics at that time. The question whether the axioms that we are using are starting from arithmetic, axioms of Peano, who was roughly contemporary to Frege, are consistent. And when Frege was completing his great life task or goal, he received a certain letter which made him add a very dramatic conclusion or addendum in the print stage of the book, saying that, well, he experienced the worst tragedy that he can happen to an author like him. The entire foundations of his edifice was shaken after the work was finished. It was thanks to a short letter from a certain Mr. Bertrand Russell. And, well, the paradox that, or inconsistency that Russell discovered is presumably known to at least some of you here. So in Frege's system, you are allowed to form a collection of all entities enjoying a given property that you can express in the formal language of the system. Today, we would write it in this set comprehension notation. So we can in particular consider the property of not being a member of itself, which is expressible. It is possible to write down in this formal language. And then, of course, you may ask whether the set of those sets that are not members of themselves is actually a member of itself. A bit like a barber who is shaving only those members of those inhabitants of the village that are only not shaving themselves. And then the question is whether the barber shaves himself. So we run into inconsistency, and because Frege's system actually included the law saying that you can derive everything from inconsistent sentence, ex falso quod libet, it means that you could essentially derive you could simply derive everything in it. Frege tried to fix his life's work dramatically in last minute. As you can imagine, this kind of effort is not bound for success. So the very same Russell who actually delivered this devastating news to Frege fixed inconsistency by developing a theory of types. And well, this was a work as huge as that of Frege, also 3 volumes together with Whitehead, and probably even more esoteric, difficult to read, and almost impossible to use. Russell himself was joking that he's aware only of 6 readers, 3 of whom were Poles, other 3 were Texans. You should not enter too deeply into what Russell had in mind. He just often preferred to express himself in a provocative way. But as you can see, it was indeed a bit of a monster. So in order to use this system, you actually, even in order to use the system to prove basic arithmetical laws, such as 1 + 1 = 2, you needed to go almost 400 pages down into the first volume, which is very promising. If you're interested more in this crazy period and the figures that I've been talking about, and I will still say a bit more in the course of this presentation, there is actually a very accessible reference in the form of a comics, which is discussing connections of logic with computer science, math, philosophy, but also insanity. But even though I said that we should not ask too deeply whom Russell actually had in mind, there is at least one obvious candidate among those Poles that he mentioned. This is Leon Chwistek, whom you see here in a picture by his own frenemy Witkacy. And he actually suggested a modification of this monstrously overblown, ramified theory of types that took almost 400 pages to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. Leading to several developments of simple theory of types with various flavors by Carnap, Ramsey, Quine, Tarski, Church, and Gödel. Russell himself called Chwistek task gigantic, and in fact he supported him in getting a chair of mathematics in Lvov, today's Lviv, against Tarski. In fact, also Stefan Banach was supporting Chwistek against Tarski. So today, of course, the relative prominence of those names is very different, but that's the kind of celebrity that he was at that time. So with that, we are entering 1920s. The above mentioned David Hilbert, who by that time developed a program for foundations of mathematics, very similar to, well, reminding us of what Frege was trying to achieve, but also very understandable from the point of view of computer science. So the goal was to develop a formal system for all mathematics, such that mathematical statements should be written in a precise formal language. Mathematical proofs should be proceded by well-specified rules. We should be able to prove completeness, consistency, and decidability. And the system should be able to prove its own consistency, even so, kind of being able to pull itself out of the bog from using its own hair. And well, Hilbert, as I said, was a brilliant mathematician, and the whole team around him was all-star team of mathematics all that time. Things were going quite well until yet another unexpected genius popped up, Kurt Gödel, who demonstrated that, well, this is all fine and dandy, but you cannot really pull yourself out of the mud by your own hair, right? That an inconsistent formal theory capable of expressing arithmetics cannot be complete, which boils down to your ability of encoding the sentence saying that I am not provable. So you are able to encode the notion of probability. You are, well, starting from your ability to encode syntax of the system, and then actually you can turn this paradoxical sentence almost like the liar paradox inside the formal system itself. But then in 1936, Gensen actually proved consistency of arithmetic, of course, assuming stronger principles than those of piano arithmetics or the system itself. In the same year, also, we see 2 competing, or rather complementary ways of explaining what algorithms are capable of in principle. So we have Church introducing the lambda calculus and Turing introducing Turing machines. And in particular, in using Turing machines, you can also see the question of whether there exists a decision procedure for the whole of arithmetics. So decided by Hilbert as a disguise of the famous or infamous halting problem. By the way, for those of you who are still PhD students, you may take consolation in the fact that Turing also didn't even have a PhD at that time. And then in 1940, Church introduced the simple theory of types. Modulo the remarks on the Ilya-Hvistek slide, so Church wasn't the only person here, but it is probably fair to say that his attempt proved most lasting. And now we can make a big skip closer to contemporary age. So I was promising you that we are going to see several results that were proved first on the side of logic and soon afterwards on the side of computer science. And I already suggested that some of you may realize that one of those crucial results is the correspondence between types and propositions, programs and proofs, and computation on simplification, the famous Curry-Howard correspondence. And as we're getting closer and closer to contemporary age, we see more and more properly computer-based oriented efforts. So in particular, we have the AutoMath project of Nicolas of De Bruyn, which is using the Curry-Howard correspondence for computer-verified mathematics, and increasingly powerful systems. So in 1971, well, one should be careful with the third one here when I'm saying that increasingly, when I'm using the phrase increasingly powerful. But systems which are increasingly suitable as foundations of mathematics, let's say, or at least formalized a formalization of foundations of computer science. So we have System F again introduced first by logician Jean-Yves Girard in 1971, and then rediscovered. As you see, this gap is getting closer and closer. This time it only takes 3 years in 1974 by John Reynolds. But at the time already Girard has a more powerful system F omega, whereas in the same year, Per-Martinov introduces intuitionistic type theory. And all those developments can be in fact seen as the basis for modern time systems. Occam, Haskell, Scala, Java, and so on and so on. And whereas the relative of Martinov type theory is the basis of proof assistant Agda. And finally, we see the proof assistant Coq entering the picture. So we have Coq and EF implementing a new theorem prover in mid-80s and introducing its foundations, at first known as calculus of constructions, combining features from intuitionistic type theory and F omega. And then Coq and Paulin, by the way, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing French names. I'm not speaking a word of French, to be honest. Extend calculus of construction to calculus of inductive constructions, which proved to be very important, very useful extensions for the purpose of formalization. Addition of inductive types and as primitives, and later also calculus of inductive construction became the foundation of other proof assistants such as Lean or Matita. And since 1990s, Coq got ported to OCaml. Then in the notice, or in the 21st century, its development has significantly picked up. So in particular in 2013, for reasons that may become clear soon, Coq received the ACM Software System Award. And at present, we are at the version 8.19.1 of Coq. By the way, one of the things that I should mention here is that, in a sense, our hero, our proof assistant, can be seen as the godfather of yet another proof assistant, Isabel. So the reason why the proof assistant Isabel is called Isabel is because Gerald's daughter actually was called like this. And by the way, this is actually a good opportunity to make a remark about nice sounding names that you see elsewhere, like Agda, Isabel, Abella, and, well, which obviously provokes misunderstandings and stupid puns. But as suggested above, on the one hand, it refers to Thierry Coquin, but it also refers to calculus of construction, COC or COC. Well, today, of course, the foundation of the theoretical, the pen and paper foundation of COG is something much more complicated. It should be called probably the predicative calculus of cumulative inductive constructions, Pickwick, which you could, of course, also use as a name for a proof assistant. But this is another important factor, namely the Gallic rooster, the COG Galois, is actually France's national symbol. And if you are involved in any way in university politics, you can imagine that if you're submitting grants, if you're getting funding, you can imagine how important such little details are for such trivial little things as the above mentioned funding and grants. And without the support of French institutions, things could have looked very differently indeed. A developer of Agda, Andreas Abel, at some point said that they say it takes 20 years to develop a proof assistant of some maturity. So you cannot do it on it is extremely hard, at least, to do it completely on your own, on a shoestring, and without a team of developers. And let me say that COG, even though it is not written in language as reputed for efficiency as C, is actually really well written and maintained system. But then, of course, you can say that what was fine for a then niche French tool in the 1980s, and certainly people like Gerald would not be unhappy about the fact that it rubs the American the wrong way. These days would be not necessarily so fine for a mainstream tool in an English-speaking world, especially in industry, but also in academia. So to the best of my knowledge, the guiding idea today is to rename COG to ROC. Personally, I would rather prefer changing the name of COG to COG Neuf. I think that's how we pronounce it in French. So both 9 and new, especially given that COG was stuck on the 8.something version since 2004, longer than macOS was stuck on Mac OS 10.x already. And I'm not quite sure how feasible renaming is anyway. There are legal issues, there is massive legacy and library of papers and code. And there is, of course, a whole ecosystem of other tools and also other puns. So, for example, the core functional programming language of COG is called Galina, which is, of course, a hen in Spanish. The name Agda of yet another proof assistant refers to a Swedish song about a hen called Agda. So yeah, all of this would be gone. But anyway, in a few years, we may be working a proof assistant ROC. Okay, so this much for logic foundations. And now let's say a few words about software path. So how about this building reliable software? Let's assume that you work at or run a software company. And like Frege, you sunk more than 30 person years, or, well, in the context of security critical software, we're talking probably of thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of person years into developing the next big thing, whether it's being famous recently for its reliability, flight controller, autonomous vehicle control for Nissan, super efficient green energy power grid controller, next big blockchain, and what have you. And then how do you avoid getting a letter like the one Frege got from last year from some white hat hackers or academic researchers, or worse, you're not getting that letter? And I'm not going to develop to say more on the potential consequences of this. And then, of course, those of you who are computer science students or practitioners are well aware that there is entire hierarchy of approaches to software reliability. Some of them are less formal, some of them are more formal, and of course, mathematical approaches are as far as possible on this scale of formality. Some people like to provoke, like Donald Knuth, who like to say that you should beware of beware of bugs in his code. He only proved that the code is correct, and never tried it actually. So it is not a trade-off. All of those methods should be used. But when it comes to the use of formal methods, the main point in which your argument may still have holes is if your assumptions do not match reality, so if there is something wrong with the specification itself, and whether you actually prove the right thing. And well, here you have a long list of various projects on the, well, not just in the academia, rather on the borderline between academia and industry. As you see in this quite random and definitely not exhaustive list, you have examples of all kinds of software. Not all of them were, not all of the software was verified with COC, but a lot has been, and there are also lots of key players in this software industrial complex that are using formal methods or even proof of substance. The previous slide was actually mostly coming from Benjamin Peirce and Steve Stanchevitz. So being European, I'd like to mention a few developments from this side of the Atlantic Ocean. We have also Kreber's formalizations of the C programming language standard, which actually discovered holes in this standard. And we had this massive project, Rust Belt, about foundations of the generally safe systems programming, but also specifically of the programming language Rust. And the key framework that was used then and is still used now by a number of leading European institutions is IRIS, a higher order concurrent separation logic framework, presently enjoying more than 100 publications. But perhaps still the flagship example that you wave around when you want to show computer scientists just how far this thing can go is something that already has more than a decade or almost 15 years of development behind it. The CompCert certified C compiler, which of course involves checking all the intermediate stages, of which there are many in the process of compilation. And pretty early in the game, external players, people who are not affiliated in any way with CompCert itself, but just wanted to compare claims for safety and security of various C compilers, put some effort into testing main competitors like GCC, LVM, and several other ones. Whereas they were able to find critical bugs in popular compilers like GCC, 25 critical and 79 altogether, 202 bugs in LLVM, and so on and so on. In CompCert, they were only able to find less than 10 bugs in the at that time unverified front-end component, and nothing in the heart of the compiler itself. And already back then, when proof assistants were not at the stage of development, and COG itself were not at the stage of development that they are now, they were saying that CompCert is the only compiler for which the tool C-Smith cannot find wrong code errors. It's apparently unbreakable. Okay, so while I do not hope that I was able to convince completely computer scientists, at least I hopefully was able to give something to them, but mathematicians and mathematical part of the audience may feel a bit left out. So you may be well justified in feeling slightly frustrated or confused because I keep talking about all this stuff like type theory, and some of you may have heard that in modern foundations it was replaced by set theory, formalizing first order logic, and I'm even talking about all this intuitionism stuff like this Martin Love intuitionist type theory, or this Carey Howard correspondence, which actually deals with intuitionistic rather than classical logic. Well, here, a caveat is necessary. It is possible to give a computational interpretation of classical logic using important programming constructs such as continuations and control operators. But, well, first of all, this is not something as primitive and clear as basic functional programming building blocks that are involved in the statement of original carry-over correspondence. It took much longer to discover. And even here, a double negation, some form of double negation translation from classical to intuitionistic logic plays a central role. So if you were told that everything that is out there is Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory with unrestricted choice, assuming that you were told this much, because from what I'm seeing, sometimes even this very name is not mentioned in many math departments, you may see some discrepancy with the story that I was telling. Of course, modulo certain things that I'm going to tell next, Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory can be indeed used to encode most of mathematics, but it's a bit like saying that you can do all your computations or programming on a Turing machine or another abstract model of computations. And I was leaving out quite a few other things from this historical sketch. So, of course, Frege's work, as I was already suggesting, was born in a specific context. And while Frege himself was not very religious or probably not even aware of this distinction between first order and second order, there were authors in his time who were distinguishing first order logic and second order logic. And similarly, we should have mentioned that in parallel to Frege, or even somewhat before him, we can say in parallel with him, there was also development of whole set theoretic foundation of mathematics by Georg Cantor, who was in fact also very harshly attacked as producing something that is somewhere in between philosophy and theology, but certainly not mathematics, to quote a very famous mathematician of that time. Just like people were not happy at all about Zermelo's proposal of the axiom of choice to prove the well-ordering theorem. And Cantor himself realized that set theory must run into paradoxes very similar to that of Russell if you don't have a clear criteria of distinguishing what he was calling consistent multiplicities. And he probably never provided, he clearly never provided himself a well-defined criteria of this kind. And first order logic, in fact, didn't play a role even decades later. So even in this whole Hilbert program that I was mentioning, it was just seen as a fragment of type theory, and there was no argument for it being a uniquely favored system. Only in the monograph Hilbert published in 1928, attention was explicitly called to completeness as of first order logic as an important problem, which triggered Gödel, in fact, the positive part of his result, which was completeness of first order predicate logic. So this is what, if you are well-trained mathematician in a classical setup, you should believe to be the foundation of everything. What is probably carved somewhere deep into your heart. In particular, you may or may not have been told that this is just a theory when formalized and first order theory having just a single binary primitive. All the other set theoretic notation that we are using is just abbreviation or syntactic sugar. And we have a bunch of important axioms, of which particularly important is the axiom of restricted comprehension, which is preventing the kind of games, which is preventing the kind of games that Russell was able to play. You not only need a well-defined first order formula distinguishing a collection, but moreover, the collection in question can be only formed out of members of a specific set. And moreover, we also have the axiom, which is entailing that no set can be a member of itself. And you have the famous or infamous axiom of choice. What you can sometimes hear, even from professional mathematicians, is that this axiom of regularity or well-foundedness is what solves the problem, because then, of course, you cannot discuss the question whether a set should be a member of itself or not. But this is, if you think about it for a second, if you did not restrict this separation or comprehension axiom, this would yield inconsistency even without Russell's help. And on the other hand, the very fact that you are restricting this key axiom that Frege wanted to use completely freely in a wild manner, it means that you are working with a very different conception of set than the one used in this early attempts at providing foundations of mathematics. I'm not going to go into the details of this right now, but it means they are working with iterative conception of set and so-called cumulative hierarchy. And in fact, it is possible to develop, it is perfectly well possible to develop formal set theories which do not have this axiom of regularity or well-foundedness, where sets can be members of themselves, but nevertheless are still based on this iterative conception of set. But while Zermelo-Fraenkel is a reasonably workable foundation, on the one hand, it provides too little, so it cannot settle the central question that Hilbert and Cantor were concerned with, that of continuum hypothesis, even if you have this unrestricted axiom of choice. Moreover, in order to build models of other theories, you almost always need to add some axiom concerning existence of some inaccessible cardinals. And on the other hand, and I am aware that this would be particularly controversial claim in most math departments, unrestricted choice, which was opposed by a number of leading mathematicians, even quite late into 20th century. Borel, Kano, Berle, Beck, Pasch, and many others were taking the Gnostic view, can be arguably described as a set theoretic hack that mathematicians got accustomed to. Even if you open books written by great Polish mathematicians after the Second World War, by not just Sierpiński, but even Kuratowski and Mostowski, you could see how careful they were to typographically distinguish theorems relying on choice. There is also a famous joke that the axiom of choice is obviously true, the bounding principle is obviously false, and who can tell about Zorn lemma? Which is just comparing the relative naturality of those equivalent, obviously, well, mathematically equivalent principles for our intuition. And if you look more deeply at what you need for development of applied mathematics, whether it's physics or economic and social sciences, you almost always need just weaker axioms such as axiom of dependent choices or countable choice. And when you look at the structure of continuum, there are even alternative set theoretic axioms such as axiom of determinacy of Michelski and Steinhaus, which make the continuum look very different than under choice, which have no paradoxical decomposition of balls, non-measurable sets of reals, non-principal ultrafilters on natural numbers, and so on and so on. In fact, they actually settle the original form of the continuum hypothesis, at least. And you can also add that the very reliance on classical logic hinders attempts at extracting the computational content of proofs. It also blocks from view or else hinders your thinking about important areas of mathematics or mathematical multiverse, as I would like to call it, following Joel Hamkins, toposes, models of homotopy type theory, and so on and so on. And if you are too well trained into the set mindset, it is quite often rather hard to reprogram yourself to film in terms of types. Actually, Kevin Bazard, one of very important mathematicians these days, promoting formalization of mathematics in proof assistant, has been complaining about this for several years. But nevertheless, if you're saying, I don't care for all this newfangled, fancy new stuff or fancy old stuff, do not worry. You have, there are tools tailored for this purpose. And in fact, a very important one that I should have even mentioned earlier in the game is the MISAR project started by Andrzej Trybulec in 1973, so just a few years later after De Bruyne's project, but years before Hawk, Isabel, Agda, and all these modern proof assistants. And it is still going strong, in fact, even with some international collaborations. And even quite recently, I have not checked if this is still a valid claim and what was the basis of it. It wasn't made by even by people from Białystok, by the way. In 2009, it was claimed to be the largest coherent body of strictly formalized mathematics in existence. It is based, well, not quite on ZFC itself, but the Tarski-Grothendieck theory, which is saying that each set belongs to a Grothendieck universe, guaranteeing in this way at least the existence of inaccessible cardinals. And there is, of course, criticism even from Isabel community that this is a monolithic system. There is no formal records on derivations, no interfaces for extension, program sources not generally being available. But still, it is a part of intellectual and cultural heritage by now to the same, almost to the same extent as intuitionism is a part of Dutch intellectual heritage, and more mathematicians and non-mathematicians, both in Poland and outside of Poland, should be aware of it, especially that the system also played an important role as inspiration to what follows. And even now, with this largest, with this very, I'm not saying whether it's largest or not, but definitely large coherent body of strictly formalized mathematics, it's great area for experimentation, for proof mining, for machine learning techniques, for translation efforts, and what have you. And the next effort, which fits a similar paradigm, is provided by Isabel. I already told you where the names come from, whose main developer is Lawrence Paulson. And who the name of whose proof language, ISAR, is actually inspired by our MISAR. It is also the main river flowing to the Munich city. Isabel is based on the Isabel's metalogic is based on very weak type theory, no dependent types, which can be used to encode different object logics like first order logic, higher order logic, ZFC itself, and one of numerous strengths of Isabel is that it has this archive of formal proofs, organized like a scientific journal, indexed by DBLP, having its own ESSN number and whatnot. And a number of important developments have numerous important developments have taken place in Isabel framework. For example, formalization of Kepler hypothesis in Isabel and whole light. More recently, Lawrence Paulson have received more than 2 million, almost 2.5 million euros in order to develop large-scale formal proof for the working mathematicians. And as you see, he was able to go quite far. A wide selection of results across the mathematical landscape, combinatorics, analysis, number theory, Ramsey theory, the work of 2 Fields medalists, a Nobel Prize winner, and on top of that, Paul Erdős. On the other hand, even very classically trained mathematicians, such as Kevin Bazard, who's coming from the same from the same tradition that actually proved Fermat's last theorem, decided that they actually prefer a proof assistant whose foundations, at least, are very similar to that of Koch. In fact, Lean, which is the system in question, describes itself as primarily a functional programming language that makes it easy to write correct and maintainable code. And you can also use Lean as interactive theorem prover. And if you look at what Agda or Idris are saying about themselves, they actually follow the same order. First, a functional programming language, then a theorem prover. This is what happens when you are not so classical, when you take Carrie Howard seriously. And one of the early strengths of Lean from the very outset was that its main developer already built his reputation as a very efficient C implementer, in particular implementer of SMT solver Z3, which brought him numerous awards in the community. And one of the in some of the earlier versions of Lean, it was also quite easy to switch meta logic. So if you wanted to be predicative or impredicative, whether you wanted to be more standard calculus of inductive constructions or do instead homotopy type theory, it wasn't that hard. There was a lot of development of homotopy type theory in Lean too, but for a number of reasons, things have moved in a different direction. And Lean, being still a very young theorem prover, proof assistant, maybe not very young, but younger than the others that I'm mentioning, has a tendency to move fast and break things. So things are not always downward compatible. But nevertheless, the above-mentioned Kevin Bazard has just received this year a 5-year grant, buying him out completely from teaching and from other activities to mechanize the proof of Fermat's last theorem. Of course, he is realistic whether or not he should expect full formalization, but at least go reasonably far in that direction, he believes. So, okay, I was doing for too long advertisements for other, or at least discussing other proof assistants with which I have very limited experience myself. I just thought that it's my duty to be fair here. But of course, also a lot of mathematics has been formalized in Cog itself. And some of you may be aware of the formalization of the 4-column theorem. Here you have an example of a map which is colored in 4 colors. The proof was mechanized roughly between 2000 and 2005 with important spade work done also here by Benjamin Werner. And okay, some of you might have heard that there was this 4-color theorem. It was proved by computer, but wasn't it a bit earlier? And the names were different. Right? It was Appel and Haken in 1976. Yes, they proved 4-color theorem using computer. But it meant something quite different. And here we have a good opportunity to distinguish what it means to prove things by computer. So in this case, it meant 400 pages of microfiche of IBM, of early IBM assembly code, which in the words of Georges Gontier were covering quite literally 1 billion cases. And we are talking here about a theorem that was proved incorrectly several times since the middle of the 19th century. And sometimes it took more than a decade before those false proofs were actually questioned. And in fact, discussion of correctness of Appel and Haken persisted through 1980s. So one of the German authors, having examined around 40% of that code, pointed out that they made a mistake in the discharging procedure. Then Appel and Haken came back saying, oh, no, this is not really a problem, but we have fixed it anyway. And then in the mid-1990s, Robertson, Sanders, Seymour, and Thomas both simplified the proof, also from mathematical point of view, and replaced assembler with C, which is quite something. But then you may ask, okay, why do I trust Cog proof assistant more than C and more than assembler? And here, to quote an important author, both when it comes to research and education in proof assistants, and specifically Cog, Adam Schlipala, his name should be pronounced like this. He spent he's American rather than Polish. The key question is whether your proof assistant satisfies the Brun criterion, namely whether you produce proof terms in small kernel language, so that even when you use complicated and extensible procedures to seek out proof in the first place, in the end, it is all about trusting this small kernel, which should be based on formal foundations comparable to those of mathematical theories such as ZF or CFC. And I already mentioned earlier on this paper about Pickwick, this pen and paper foundations, which actually builds a model of that type system in set theoretic terms. And then in order to believe a proof, we can ignore the possibility of bugs introduced during the search and rely on just small proof-checking kernel, which will be applied to the results of that search. Gontier actually and his team follow up in style very bigly on what they have done. So their work actually led to entire library of formalized mathematics, MathComp, and alternative tactic language for called small-scale reflection, SSReflect. And this is also a good opportunity to say a few words about this business of tactics and degree of automation that you have in different proof assistants. So in some tools, which are more like programming languages like Agda, they you write code more like you'd write code of a program. Of course, you are somehow guided or assisted in case of Agda by its excellent dependent pattern magic. On the other hand, you also have proof assistants like Isabelle, which so to say, offshore proof search to fully automated theorem provers, which are not the same thing as proof assistants, via its powerful sledgehammer tool. Whereas tactics can be seen as, in my view, very good compromise. Well, in case of Coq, you also have to use, sometimes you need to use a camel API. Lean has more goals to be actually more self-contained as it is its own tactic language. In the case of Coq, the tactic language is separate from the core functional programming language. And tactics, which can be seen as a way of meta-programming your core functional language, they can be also used to provide domain-specific decision procedure for Pressburg arithmetic, for rings, fields, propositional logic, what have you. So for Coq, default tactic language is LTAC, but you can use other ones such as SSReflect, which arguably may lead to proofs that are more natural from a mathematician, more readable and more workable from mathematician's point of view. Okay, so this was a digression about SSReflect, but coming back to what Gontier and his group did next, it was work in classification of finite groups and mechanizing Fate-Thompson odd order theorems. So we have yet another Fields medalist in the mix. And as you see, this was really a collaborative effort with a lot of co-authors. The number of co-authors makes it look more like a paper in physics rather than in mathematics. And while the algebra, if you look at recent developments, you can also find formalizations relating to Lebesgue measure, integration theory, approximation theory, Chebyshev polynomials, and things like this. But there is still a big name that is missing from this story. And actually, I chose that name to deliver the most important message, I believe, from mathematician's point of view. So, of course, what I have who I have in mind is Władimir Wojewodzki, another Fields medalist for his work in homotopy theory for algebraic varieties and formulating motivic cohomology. You may think, of course, that somebody as brilliant as that probably had only tangential side interest in not just proof assistant, but it's called business of proof theory, or maybe at some point he just realized that his brilliant mathematics can provide formal model, univalent model of type theory in simplicial sets, which indeed he did at some point, and just threw it to this crowd of type theorists and other computer scientists saying, okay, here you have something from the heights, Himalayan heights of pure mathematics, but you'd be guessing wrong. That's not what happened, really. In fact, the story of Wojewodzki, the way he told it himself, was very, very different. Very, very different, sorry. And actually, this is such an important story that I chose to quote him in quite extensively for like 5 or 6 slides. In his paper that you may find online, and I definitely encourage you to read the whole thing from 2014, not too long before he sadly perished. he described how his attention shifted from motivic cohomology to type theory. So from the very beginning, his original field of interest, motivic cohomology, was thought to be highly speculative and lacking field foundation. In particular, a certain groundbreaking paper by Spencer Bloch was very soon found to contain a mistake in a very early stage of the game in one of the first lemmas. Proofs could not be fixed, all the claims of the proofs were left as unsubstantiated. Well, okay, this of course opens possibility for young and brilliant mathematicians like Vojevodsky to work. Then there was a new proof which replaced just one paragraph from the original paper by 30 pages of complex arguments. Not made public until 1993, and it took years to be accepted as correct. And moreover, this proof was based on older results of another author, Mark Spivakowski, who at the same time announced a proof of important conjecture about singularities. And that proof survived for quite a while, for several years, until it was found to contain a mistake, and at least when Vojevodsky was writing his recollections, the conjecture remained open. And then, okay, this is all about other people. But then suddenly things started to close down on Vojevodsky himself. So his own approach to motivic cohomology was written up in 1992, 1993. And again, for years, it was something discussed and read throughout mathematics department across the world. And only almost a decade later, when Vojevodsky was giving a series of lectures to a very attentive reader who was checking every step of his arguments, he realized that a key lemma in his own paper contained a mistake, and that lemma could not be salvaged. And it took years, it took a weaker and more complicated lemma, which fortunately saved the important, the crucial part of the paper, which was published later in 2006. And at that moment, Vojevodsky already started to get scared. So as we said, multiple groups of mathematicians were studying his papers and seminars, using it in their work, and none of them noticed a mistake. At the time, he was already a trusted author, a mathematical celebrity, and then people would not necessarily check and look similar to, if you see an argument which is similar to arguments known to be correct, would you really check it always in detail? And in fact, his own experience indicated other problems as well. So it was pointed out to him that a key argument in Omega Grupowicz's paper that he published in Iliad in 1989 cannot be true, but he and his co-author believed that they had considered a similar critique themselves and convinced themselves that it did not apply. And he only realized 15 years after Carlos Simpson provided this criticism that Carlos Simpson was actually right. So that was just a year before he wrote that recollection from which I'm taking all those quotes. And of course, a part of the problem was that Carlos Simpson was not as recognized mathematician as Vojevodsky himself at the time, and there is a relative hierarchy of importance that you attach to arguments depending on reputation, probably. And for a while, I'm going still to return to the claims that Vojevodsky is making in his story, but just to strengthen his point, I'm going to steal now a slide from a set of slides provided by Lawrence Paulson this year when he was presenting the outcomes of that major 2,400,000 euros grant that he was dealing with when he was trying to explain quickly to mathematicians why all this work on formalizing mathematics is important and relevant. And in order to illustrate it, he just chose to took footnotes to a single page of Thomas Yech axiom of choice book. And as you see, within a few lines, you see that you have here results of problems contradicting results announced in a published and referred paper whose construction could not be completed. There was transfer to result claimed elsewhere, but outline methods appears to be unsatisfactory and has not been published. Then if in yet another footnote to yet another result, there was a contradicting result that was announced and later withdrawn. Yet another problem or example in that problem was a counterexample to another condition of Mostowski, who conjecture is sufficiency. Well, this is okay. This is actually pretty good. But then in the next footnote, you have independence result contradicting the claim of a paper that actually got refereed and published. So those things happen, but of course, but when you see them compacted like this within a space of several lines, and we are not talking about a new field such as motivic homology was in Wojewódzki's Sturm und Drang period, but well-established field such as set theory was there in late 60s or early 70s. That should also give you a pause. So Wojewódzki said that at that stage, he actually was fearing for the future to the extent that he actually stopped what he was calling curiosity-driven research. And he convinced himself that the only long-term solution was somehow to make it possible to use computers to verify these abstract logical mathematical constructions. And he looked at several tools that were available at that time. You may probably guess from the presentation so far what he is referring to, but none of them was sufficiently good for his purposes. And in fact, part of the problem was that none of them was in any way appropriate for the kind of mathematics for which he needed that system. That's what he says. He's winner, not a me. If you want to work with a financial system not as a standard for consistency to establish a few fundamental theorems, but as a tool which can be employed in everyday mathematical work, then Wojewódzki believed we need quite a different setup, which would not necessarily be based on predicate logic and which is able to express to speak about objects much more complicated than what we're dealing with in this basic set theoretic encoding of mathematics. This is a portrait of a conceptual portrait of homotopy type theory. So of course he was using knowledge and insights from his earlier period in formulating his univalent foundations. So there is still possibly quite a bit of beauty involved in and quite involved mathematics in what he was doing in the later stage of his career. But at that time, he was seeing himself as a type theorist. I attended myself a presentation of Wojewódzki at a type theoretic conference when the speaker was actually introducing him as that great fields medalist who actually deigned to descend from heavens to have a look at our meager field, and Wojewódzki stopped him. No, that's not how I want to be seen. That's not what I am. I am type theorist just like you are. Okay, so this is fine and dandy. We are kind of running out of time. I want to leave at least 5 minutes for questions. If there are any, but I still didn't tell you much how all this stuff can be used in teaching. And I also didn't still provide you much information about this personal perspective. So how I came to be interested in all this. So when I was a postdoc in Leicester in 2010 to 2012, another time I was still not obliged to do much teaching, but whatever experiences and exposition I had were already quite thought-provoking. How you actually get people to understand, even if they understand, let's say, mathematical induction, to understand induction on a more complex entities, structural induction on trees, and induction on complexity of proofs. How do you get people to understand foundations of programming languages, semantics of programming languages, how you get them to understand what is a valid proof and what is not a valid proof, and so on and so on and so on. And at that time I came at two presentations of Benjamin Pierce, whom, as I told you, you can see as who provided quite a few slides for this presentation as well. right before. So at that time, it was right before he became a Turing. He became a fellow of Association of Computing Machinery, and he presented in those slides his software foundations concept and its early educational systems at University of Pennsylvania. Keynote slides at ICFP 2009 and 2010. You can still find them online. I encourage you to have a look at them yourself, about Lambda, the ultimate teaching assistant, using a proof assistant to teach programming language foundations. And Proof Assistant as a teaching assistant, a view from the trenches, keynotes at pretty major computer science conferences. Today, you can find also on his webpage slides of his newer presentation about Lambda, the ultimate teaching assistant 15 years later. So, of course, the best way to learn something is to teach from it. And while I was not in a position to do it in Leicester, as soon as I moved to Erlangen, Nuremberg, I only had a chance, but also obligation to teach. And I had to say that whatever promises Benjamin Pierce was making there, by and large, have come true for me. This lecture has worked pretty well for more than a decade. These days, we are even using sandboxed version of the Coq Proof Assistant in obligatory, non-elective introductory logic lecture by our chair. And the dedicated lecture, Software Foundation lectures, provides you with knowledge of foundations of functional programming, a bit about constructive logic, because in the basic lecture we still teach in classical logic, of course, logical foundations, proof techniques for inductive definitions, and then we move on to actual programming language material. We're discussing this distinction between big step and small step operational semantics, modeling core, algol, imperative, while programs, and we're talking about logic of precondition, postcondition. Then we move on to type systems, single time lambda calculus, type safety, subtyping, independent type programming. You can do quite a lot, as it turns out, within just one semester. And as Benjamin Pierce promised us in this, or me in this presentation 15 years ago, using the use of interactive theorem prover actually provides each student with, in a sense, his or her own personal tutor, which turns doing proofs and logic into programming, which is fun, right? So there are numerous resources, and if you have access to the Git repository, you can play around with the source of software foundations yourself. The one and the same master file provides you with proof scripts the students work with during the lecture, solving exercises and whatnot, the lecture slides themselves, post-lecture reading material. And moreover, you also get autograder for homeworks. And of course, you can extend it however you fancy. So I personally added discussion of SS Reflect, proof language, the extra slide precondition, more systematic treatment of constructive logic. But then anyway, since this early period in the notice, there have been 6 other volumes of software foundations appearing with a lot of material. There are also pen and paper developments, such as types and programming languages by Benjamin Pierce himself. There is the Coq book, somewhat obsolete, but still actually useful reference. And of course, there is online documentation of Coq itself. And there are alternative approaches to teach and software foundations using Coq, such as Chipala's certified programming with dependent types. By now, if you don't tweak this material quite a bit, it can be a bit obsolete. Chipala himself has moved to another book, which is pretty interesting development is in own right, but actually found even this old book with its very different approach to automation, for example, pretty interesting complementary reference for a more advanced course that I am also teaching. So the thing that you say to students at the very beginning and the first lecture is that whereas the full capabilities of your proof assistants can resemble a cockpit of Boeing or Airbus or another passenger plane, what you're going to start with would be much more modest, and even towards the end of the semester, it will not resemble at all the cockpit of of an airplane, but at the very least, you will be already able to have some fun with it and maybe even do some simulation. And then, of course, you can keep progressing. So there were quite a few students who move on from teaching to research. There were quite a few student projects, bachelor and MSc thesis, some of which ended up in papers as formalization, supporting papers, and students becoming co-authors, or students formalizing papers that I wrote earlier. And in fact, one of such students actually is the one who got me my first POPL paper after moving to Max Planck Institute in Saarbrücken. And thanks to what he learned about proof assistant, it would just provided a good starting point for him. I mean, he was a very good student anyway, so he would get a career one way or another. But I'm very happy to see that he moved in that direction. And by now, he already got his PhD, publishing several prestigious papers each year. I think within a year or so, he's going to have more more citations than me, and probably within a few years, exponentially more. And at first I did some formalizations myself, such as mechanizing a highly syntactic theorem about finite order formulas in deterministic logic. But then I soon learned that doing them with students is most beneficial for both sides, for a number of reasons. That would be subject for another presentation or seminar. And at the moment, I'm quite excited about the new master thesis of my student, translating proofs generated by an obsolete automated theorem, Prover 9, into Coq, which we are turning into publication. And Prover 9, some of you, at least those who are doing work in logic or universal algebra, used to be, for good reasons, pretty popular tool, and a very good tool, which was actually able to find those proofs for you, at least in equational logic, but it only had a single developer, Bill McCune, one of fundamental people in automated theorem proving, who sadly perished in 2009. And in his case, there were no continuators, no institutional support. So the tool remains unmaintained since 2009, with quite a few legacy proofs, which are not always easiest to parse. And when you translate it into a modern, still maintained proof assistant, you can actually play around with all those generated proofs and do something with them, check if they are really correct, and whether there is no gap or no bug in this old tool itself. And there are also other projects translating more niche proof assistants into Coq. Of course, again, given that the intended audience or the main audience of this talk should be in mathematics, but then I would argue personally that the case for mechanized physics and projects should be even stronger. And I can recall Kevin Bazard of Imperial College making a similar point. I was even looking for that particular quote. I wasn't able to find it quickly when preparing this presentation, but I'm pretty sure he said something along those lines. Namely, and probably most of you can recognize the truth of this argument. So most of bachelor level or perhaps even master level work in math departments, with notable exceptions, of course, these days is decades away from the research frontline. So paper artifacts produced by students in the process are practically useless. I mean, they are useful for the student herself or himself to climb this ladder and then throw it away, like in Wittgenstein's famous quote. But if instead you are formalizing proofs of informed order results in not necessarily just one, as you see, there are quite a few systems to choose from, and I didn't even mention all of them. You producing an artifact which can be and should be of value to the broader community. Ditto also, we work on translations between different setups and different formalizations of the same proof. So in the process, you would also learn some highly non-typical hacking skills, which, as I already suggested, could be applicable, for example, when verifying, say, security-critical software. And whereas physicists are often dangerous competitions on job market when it comes to the computational skills, numerical skills, they see hacking skills, here I believe they would pose not so significant threat or competition, because as a rule they are unconcerned with those foundational issues. And also, if you're concerned about the progress of artificial intelligence and machine learning, here it is more of an opportunity than a threat. So if you are just a code monkey throwing some boilerplate code, copying and pasting what you find online, then of course, or even now tools like ChatGPT can probably play the same game better. But here, I hope this presentation convinces you we are talking about quite different game. Of course, as though these bodies of formalized mathematics grow bigger and bigger, and we getting closer and closer to proof assistance that you actually would like to use in your own work. Also, the space for proof mining, machine learning guided search for potential new proofs or at least new tactics is widening, and this is probably this might be a growing area in future. You can already see efforts along those lines, but as you probably are aware of, you cannot really fully trust whatever is produced by those large language models, tools like ChatGPT. And if anything, the need for verification, formal systematic verification of what is being done will only grow rather than shrink. Okay, I think that by now I can and probably should stop. I cannot see what's going on YouTube, but if there are any questions, so let me just finish with a word about our sponsors once again. And well, thank you thank those probably few of you who still survived up to this moment.